Does Kentucky's Commonwealth Accountability Testing System, or CATS, require proficiency for all in 2014? Our objective in this part of the program is to determine the inflation over time in the Kentucky Core Content Tests, which are part of the Commonwealth Accountability Testing System, often called CATS. The method we're going to use is a score comparison tool that we call the NAEP Rigor Ratio. We'll describe the NAEP Rigor Ratio and then use it to show how Kentucky's core content tests have consistently been inflating ever since 1999. Before we tell you about the NAEP Rigor Ratio, we need to tell you a few things about the NAEP, or the National Assessment of Educational Progress, first. This is the federal school testing program, and Kentucky has participated in math and reading since 1990. The NAEP provides scores in two formats. The first are scale scores, which we won't use in this program. The second are achievement levels. These are below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. There are a couple of key NAEP achievement levels that we will use in the rigor ratio, but first we need to mention that for all of the achievement levels, scores are reported in terms of percentages of students who are at or above each level. Those key NAEP achievement levels that we will use for our rigor ratio are first the basic level, which denotes only partial mastery of prerequisite knowledge and skills that are fundamental for proficient work at a given grade level, and then proficient. This represents solid academic performance. Students reaching the proficient level on NAEP have demonstrated competency over challenging subject matter. Just like the NAEP, there are key achievement levels in the Kentucky Core Content Tests as well. Those are called novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. The key achievement level we're going to use in the Kentucky Core Content Test is the proficient level. This level is often proclaimed as the goal for students in the Kentucky Core Content program. Also, like the NAEP, the Kentucky Core Content Test achievement levels are reported as percentages of students reaching each of the levels. In fact, for purposes of this program, we combine the percentage of students graded proficient with the percentage graded distinguished in the Kentucky Core Content Test and state those as proficient or better in this program. With that background complete, let's develop the NAEP ruler that we're going to use to measure the NAEP rigor ratio of the Kentucky Core Content Tests in math and reading. We're going to start with real results that Kentucky achieved for grade 8 NAEP math in 2005. We need to set up a scoring scale to plot some scores, and our scale will run from 64 at the bottom to 22 at the top. I know you can't see the small numbers on the screen very well, but that's how this scale is set up. The first thing we're going to do is plot the percentage of students that scored at or above NAEP Basic on grade 8 math in 2005. That was 64%, plotted by the arrow shown here. Next, we're going to plot the percentage of students that scored at or above NAEP Proficient. That was 23% in 2005 on 8th grade math. Those 2 points now define our NAEP ruler, which runs from 0 down at the bottom opposite the orange arrow to a score of 100 opposite the green arrow at the top of the page. To be clear on this, we have increasingly higher standards as we move up the NAEP ruler from the bottom of the page to the top of the page. Now we plot in the percentage of students that scored at or above proficient on the Kentucky Core Content Test. That was 36%, shown by the blue arrow on the picture. Finally, using our NAEP ruler, we compute that the NAEP rigor ratio for the Kentucky Core Content Test in 8th grade math in 2005 was 68.3. Well, our NAEP ruler works pretty well for states that don't have really low standards, but what about a case where a state does have low standards? Sadly, Kentucky does have some low standards. Let's look at an example. In the 2005 4th grade reading tests, 31% of Kentucky students scored proficient or better on the NAEP, as shown by the green arrow again, and 65% scored NAEP Basic or better, as shown by the orange arrow. However, 68% scored proficient or better on the Kentucky Core Content Test. This actually gives us a negative NAEP rigor ratio for Kentucky for 4th grade reading of minus 8.8 points. That concludes our discussion of how the NAEP rigor ratio is determined. Now let's take a look at some NAEP rigor ratios for Kentucky's KCCT tests over time. This first slide shows the state assessment to NAEP rigor ratio for elementary school reading. Notice that there's been a continual decline in the rigor of the Kentucky Core Content 4th grade reading tests ever since 2002. And in fact, today the rigor is even less demanding for a proficient score on the KCCT than what NAEP demands for a basic score. Now this slide shows the NAEP rigor ratio for Kentucky's middle school reading test. Here again you can see that since 2002 there has been a very notable decline in the rigor in Kentucky's test in comparison to what the NAEP requires. It's not quite as bad as what happened for 4th grade reading, but the decline is still very considerable. Now let's take a look at mathematics. This slide shows the elementary school mathematics NAEP rigor ratio for Kentucky's testing program. Notice that there was a slight decline between 2003 and 2005, but a very notable decline between 2005 and 2007. I should point out that the standards were reset in the Kentucky Core Content Test between 2005 and 2007, and the results are obvious. A very considerable further watering down of requirements for elementary school mathematics proficiency are evident in this NAEP rigor ratio slide. Finally, the last slide in our grouping shows you the performance of Kentucky's Core Content Test for middle school mathematics. As in all the other cases, the rigor ratio declined from the early years of the CATS testing, which started in 1999 through 2007. However, there was again a very significant decline between 2005 and 2007, indicating that the resetting of the CATS standards at this grade also resulted in a significant further watering down of what was required to reach proficiency. Before concluding this program, I want to mention a few cautions. The NAEP is impacted by changes in exclusion rates, test accommodation rates, and demographic changes. However, changes for Kentucky in these areas have been fairly small since 2002, and although the rates are high, they have not changed very much, so that the impact on the NAEP rigor ratio in this program should be small. I also need to mention that the NAEP achievement level scores used in this program are considered to be developmental. However, any errors in these scores are likely to be small compared to the very large shifts in Kentucky's rigor ratios that we pointed out in this program. With those cautions complete, let's summarize. Comparing Kentucky's NAEP and Kentucky Core Content Test math and reading performance shows that the KCCT scoring standards have steadily been declining ever since those tests started in 1999. In addition, the standards are lower for Kentucky's elementary school core content tests than they are for the middle school tests. Now this raises a very serious question about claims that elementary schools are doing better than Kentucky's middle schools. When we compare the NAEP rigor ratios for elementary schools and middle schools, we see that consistently the elementary schools have lower rigor ratios than the middle schools, although the situation is much worse for reading than it is for mathematics. We must point out that the lower KCCT rigor discussed in this part of our program adds to lowered standards for scoring of schools using the CATS growth charts that we discussed in our earlier program parts. This double lowering of standards in different parts of the CATS program add together in a way that makes the standards in CATS today lower than anything Kentucky's assessment program has experienced ever since its beginning way back in the early 1990s. In closing this program, I hope you have a better understanding of the continual erosion of standards that's taking place in Kentucky's public school assessment program. Hopefully, as the public becomes better informed about these serious issues, better assessment and reporting will occur. For the sake of Kentucky's children, we must not allow this erosion of standards and accountability to continue.